I gotta say, seeing West Virginia on the screen, where are West Virginians? There we go. I love you guys, but that was one of the most traumatic experiences of my life. You know, sometimes I joke around about traveling around the country. I spend a lot of time with politicians. That sounds like penance, right? It is penance. You know, I'm relatively speaking, it's sort of the way I'm made, the way God made me. I'm pretty impatient, and I can be pretty aggressive. This is my nature, so I'm a aggressive, confrontational, impatient. Why did my wife marry me again? She tamed me some, and so I go into these legislatures, and none of that works, by the way. Right? You go into a legislature and you're aggressive, they just blow you off, they're in control, you're impatient, they move at their own pace, that doesn't work. And then I feel like I should be in control, right? It's on me to make it happen. And West Virginia was a great lesson for me because 2 years in a row, I went in, I talked to the speaker, we're gonna make it happen. First year didn't happen. Next year I went in, I met with the speaker. And so when the speaker tells you he's going to make it happen and you think everything's good, and then you go in and talk to the speaker next year, there's two people that walk into that office. It's just me, but it's the split personality. The one, the flesh, wants to say, Mr. Speaker, you lying. Last year you told me and you didn't, and I'm... And that's what I want to say. And instead I said, Mr. Speaker, it is so nice to see you. Penance, right? A lot of years of impatience and aggressive behavior, and I'm an attorney, so not only am I that way naturally, but I got trained that way, and I've had to learn to just sit back and just chill, because God has his plan, it'll happen in time. Hopefully my lesson, some of you learn, you're going through legislatures, it's really frustrating, we can't make it happen, we can't force them to do stuff. You know, there's only three things that we control in our own lives. We control who we trust. For me, that starts with God. We control what we actually do. Do I go to a state? Do I hang out with you? How do I spend my time? And then maybe the most important in the end is a lot of stuff is going to happen to us in our lives. And the question is, what's our attitude about it? Like, how do we handle it? So for me, that's a big one, is learning how to deal with this stuff and keep going and have a positive attitude. And you guys see me on camera enough, you know, generally have a positive attitude. I got to work on that. All right, so that's something we all should work on. So one of the things that's been a theme here that I'm most excited about, and I didn't think about this in advance, is the people that we're bringing to you are friends. They're COS family. They're people I love personally, and I've spent time with, and they know you guys as activists, and they love you. And the guy who we're going to bring up next is no exception to that. Now, he was supposed to be here live, and he couldn't be. So he's coming to us by Skype. I'm very disappointed by that because I'd like to give him a big hug. But here's the deal. He just welcomed a new baby into his family, right? So that's a good excuse, right? And when I say just, I think it was yesterday. Maybe the day before. The days are blurring together for me. And so he's got his hands full, and so... He's got a family actually where just a few months ago, they brought another baby into their family, as surrogates. And so they have two babies in the family now, under 3 months apart. Okay, so is it fair he's not here? So the guy that I'm going to bring up is Dave Rubin. And the first time I met Dave was in Los Angeles in the San Fernando Valley. I grew up in the San Fernando Valley. That's where he's from. His podcast was just starting to explode. He was gracious enough to be willing to meet with me, and I brought my son Jacob with me. I won't ever forget it. It was really cool. His studio was very close to Prager, which was very close to where Daily Wire and Ben Shapiro were at the time. Walking distance, literally just a couple of blocks away in the San Fernando Valley. It was kind of super familiar territory for me. So I brought Jacob, and Dave picked the restaurant. We ate at this little kosher, like hipster kosher restaurant. That's an oxymoron, isn't it? I don't know. It was kind of a hipster kosher restaurant. It was great. Had a great meal. Had great conversation. That's the thing about Dave Rubin. He is, in my opinion, America's premier conversationalist. I've not met anybody that can interview the way Dave interviews. And And the reason I think he's so good at this, and I think he's got a great brain, he's got great insights, he's got great commentary, he has a great perspective on the world, came from the left, he's come to the right, he's really interesting, mixed guy with all these different perspectives on the world. But when he talks to somebody, he's actually really interested. It's not just an interview. It's not just like, oh, this is the next guy on my list, so I'm going to sit down and chat with them. This is somebody who, when he sits down with a guest, he wants to know. It's not just a list of questions. He really wants to know. He really wants to understand. He really wants to learn. And I think that makes for a fascinating interview. We've had a chance to spend time together socially. We've done some work together. I love him. I know you guys love him. So please welcome via Skype our good friend Dave Rubin.
Kind words. Yes, it is true. We just had a baby 2 days ago, and basically they try to keep you in the hospital for 48 hours, and I'm pretty sure I just illegally stole my child out of the hospital here, and the cops could be busting into my studio at any moment. We just got home about 10 minutes ago. I threw on the jacket and the shirt, and I'm here for you guys. I do apologize for not being able to be in Orlando with you. As some of you know, I am a new Floridian. I'm probably the proudest and most excited new Floridian, perhaps in all of the state. Yeah, you can make the road to Florida. It is now my adopted home, but as I keep telling people, they are going to bury me in the Everglades to just feed me to the gators, because I just love this place, and I have a sort of renewed call in life to fight for this state. And of course, that's very much in line with everything that Convention of States is doing. So again, I do apologize that I'm not there with you guys in person, but hopefully over the coming months, we'll do some more events together, and Mark and I can get on stage together, and I get to shake hands and all that good stuff. So with that in mind, what I wanted to talk to you guys about today were a couple things. The title of this talk is How to Red Pill Your Friends and Family. And it's funny because in some ways, I'm sort of, I suppose, one of the top red pill dealers in the country right now. And I know that can sound kind of scary, but for you guys sitting there and watching at home, it shouldn't sound that scary, because the idea of the red pill, which of course came from the movie The Matrix. There's a very famous scene that I'm sure all of you have seen at least once. I've seen it probably 100 times. Myself, there's a very famous scene where Lawrence Fishburne, who's playing Morpheus, he's talking to Keanu Reeves, who's playing Neo, and they're really at the moment of the movie. Which way is Neo going to go? Is he going to take the blue pill and just never realize what reality is and live in this sort of ignorance is bliss existence? Or is he going to take the red pill and, as they say, see how far the rabbit hole goes? Is he going to swallow that red pill and look at the world realistically, see what's really going on, not be confused by the lies, not just swallow the narrative because the powers that be push it on you? And that meme of the red pill, and there's a very, I'm sure you've all seen the meme on Twitter too, where Morpheus is standing there and he's got the two pills in his hands, and Neo's looking at it through his mirrored sunglasses. And of course, it goes without saying, Neo takes the red pill, thus his adventure of the Matrix movies begins. And what that means in a political context, what that means relative to what we're talking about here at the Convention of States, is that it's time for more of us to see the world as it is, perhaps rather than how we wish it to be. And I think for a long time in America, especially for a certain set, for those of you that are maybe under 50, we just all kind of thought that it was going to work. We thought that the machine could kind of keep chugging on, and no matter what, our freedoms would roughly be protected, and we'd be able to say what we want, and there wouldn't be this wide chasm between the states and all of these things. The government wouldn't lock you in your house or force you to be injected with an experimental vaccine. And suddenly we're all realizing, boy, that is not true. So there is a massive red pilling of America right now. And we're seeing this, by the way, in all sorts of polls. I'm not a huge fan of polls because I find that generally you're able to sway them one way or another. Sample sizes are usually too small, it depends who they're talking to and all of those things. However, we are witnessing a young generation, I'm 46 years old, so that's why I say sort of under 50, of a mass awakening. You know, many young people grow up with, I would say, what are factory settings that lead you to kind of being a Democrat. It's something like, oh, Republicans are mean and Democrats are nice. Liberals care about poor people and conservatives care about money. Republicans care about war and Democrats care about peace. These are all sort of nonsensical things, but these are the factory settings that you are fed through culture, our movies, our TV, all of the radio, podcasts, all of these things, all of the sort of mainstream things, and our political machine and everything else. And fortunately, over the last couple of years, for the people that sort of by default with those factory settings took that blue pill, they just thought that's just kind of how it is. And by the way, I was one of those people, as Mark mentioned. I was a lefty for most of my life. I was on the Young Turks network, which is a far left network, and by being around that sort of hysteria and the leftism that does not work, that has now morphed into socialism and communism that we see here in America proudly by some of the members of the Democratic establishment, by being around it enough, I fortunately woke up and started talking to some of these, scary right-wingers, as they're called, guys like Ben Shapiro and Dennis Prager and Glenn Beck and many others. So there is something, what I went through, the sort of why I left the left moment, and I'm sure many of you have seen that PragerU video. I think it's been seen something like 40 million times around the world at this point. What I went through thinking, oh, it's all just going to work, and the system sort of works for me. And if you put tax money towards things, then you'll get better services. Well, a whole bunch of us, especially in the last 2 years, and this is the silver lining to everything, and this is why I like talking about the red pill. Boy, an awful lot of people have been red-pilled over the last 2 years. An awful lot of people, suddenly when the government told them to stay in their houses, and the government said, you cannot go to work, and the government said, you cannot go to school, and you are non-essential. What a horrific, I remember the first time I heard that phrase, we have essential workers and non-essential workers. And what a horrible way to describe people. But that was, the system was sort of dehumanizing all of us over the last couple of years. And that to me was one of the real ones that I thought, this is a bridge too far. Just listen to the language that they use. When they told us, oh, we've got 2 weeks to flatten the curve. And then suddenly that morphed into, oh, there's a new normal. And we just kept going and going and going. But that leads us to the red pilling, because for the last 2 years, it's almost more than 2 years at this point, it's rather extraordinary, between lockdowns and mandates and military people being fired from service and good doctors who fought, vaccines or lockdowns or whatever it might be, being kicked out of work and not allowed in hospitals, all of those things, a whole bunch of people started going, wait a minute. Is the system really working for me? Why am I listening to these bureaucrats? Why is it that Pfizer and Moderna sponsor every single news show on every major network? If you guys have not seen it, we've played it many times on my channel, and you can definitely find it on YouTube or Rumble. There is a spectacular compilation video where they take all the ins and outs when the news anchors are throwing to commercial and when they're coming back from commercial, and they do the brought to you by, and you can literally watch Sunday morning news shows as the guests are talking about COVID, as they bring Anthony Fauci on, and as they bring Walensky from the CDC and the rest of these people on, and then they throw to commercial, brought to you by our sponsors, Pfizer and Moderna. And more people started seeing it. They were putting it right in front of our faces. I mean, one thing that's really nice, actually, in the age of the internet, which has made us all crazy and sometimes angrier, and although it's called social media, it's made us more antisocial. One thing that's nice is that you have an ability now, if you see something, you can share it. In the old days, if the news was lying about something, if the media was lying about something, if they selectively edited a video to make it seem like someone
literally said the reverse of what they said. Sometimes they remove the word not, or they remove the word and or but. They have all sorts of tricks. Well, 15, 20 years ago, when most of you guys were growing up, anyone my age was growing up, if you saw that sort of nonsense on CNN or MSNBC or whatever it might be, you could tell your friend about it, but you really couldn't do much. But now you can clip those videos. You can get those videos out there. And that is what is causing some of this red pilling. People are seeing through the media madness. They are seeing through the political madness. I mean, think about the state that I fled, which every time on my show, when I mention California, I have to put $5 in this jar. And the reason I do that is that at the end of the year, I'm going to save a Californian. I have a long list of people who reach out to me, Dave, I want to get out of California. I'm not kidding, Mark. If you got somebody good that you want to throw my way, and I'm going to help them move to Florida. I'm not kidding. I'm going to throw in a couple thousand of my own dollars too, and I want to help somebody. The counter to that was a lot of people emailed me and said, Dave, forget bringing another Californian here, even if they're good. How about we just get a Democrat out of Florida? I'm considering it. We'll see. But, you know, when I was in California during the lockdowns, and I was there for most of it, I'll never forget the day that I got to the free state of Florida. It was December 17th, 2021. And actually, when the plane landed, I kid you not, physically, I felt something lift off my chest, like I could breathe deeper. Because being under that kind of government control and lockdown and masks and vaccines and all of those things, it's not the American way. It's actually antithetical to everything that America is all about, that the founding documents are all about, and all of those things. And if you want to talk about red pilling, well, it's happening even in California to a degree, although they vote the wrong people in, and the recall election did not go the way that I'm sure everyone in this room would have loved, and I campaigned with Larry Elder and we tried, but an awful lot of people, I would go to these rallies, an awful lot of people would be out there, and these were not Republicans, these were not conservatives. They were what I would call liberals or Democrats who were mugged by reality. They were people who thought, okay, the government is kind of what it is, but it's not going to lock me in my house. It's not going to inject me with anything. It's not going to force me to do this or that. And then suddenly I was at all of these rallies, which were thought of as right-wing rallies. And of course, the media called them far-right rallies. And all anyone was there to do was make sure that they could go to work or get their kids to go to school. But I started meeting all these people who were newly red-pilled. And they were coming up to me and they were going, wait a minute, this is not the Democratic Party of my father. This is not the JFK, ask not what your country can do for you, ask what you can do for your country. This is a party that, first off, has one party rule in California, which is tremendously dangerous when one party can just run and do everything it wants. And by the way, most of the things that it does are counter to flourishing, right? High taxes do not make a state flourish. When I left California, again on December 17th, 2021, and I will never forget it, I took 2 companies with me, with many employees. And now we moved one of the companies, Locals, which was a tech company I started to fight big tech. We moved to Miami, and Rumble, which eventually acquired Locals. We moved them to Sarasota, and Rumble just went public. So these were job makers on top of my own show and my employees for my show. So we did this, and we took resources out of the state. And I'm sure some of you know this, but the numbers are actually mind-blowing, 350,000 people left California last year. 350,000 people in 2021. It is the second.
Dave, can I interrupt you for a minute?
You can.
You just said California. Right? $5, buddy.
Oh, I just said California.
$5.
Good man. Thank you. Keeping me honest. I
Sorry
appreciate
about
that. Man, can you imagine if on CNN, every time someone screwed up, they had someone putting cash in a jar? So 350,000 people leave in 2021. It was the second year of net loss of population in California's history, and it would surprise none of you, of course, that the first year ever that California...
You did it again, Dave.
Oh, man, you're going to cost me some dough.
The audience helped me with that one. You're in
all
so
right,
much trouble,
they're
dude.
good. Maybe in lieu of me doing this prank the whole time, Mark, maybe I should just I'll just put a blank check on my desk and we'll square it up at the end. You can just somebody can send me the numbers. Of course, 2021 was the first year that that place lost. I'm doing all right over here, but at some point it's enough. So you can see what's happening here. There's a reason for that. There is a reason people are saying, well, wait a minute. I pay all these high taxes, and what do I expect? If I'm paying high taxes, what do I expect? Well, I would expect that the roads would be nice and there wouldn't be potholes everywhere. I would expect that law enforcement be funded to a degree that they're able to do their job. I would expect that we would have drugs off the street and crime would be relatively low, that our social services would be pretty decent. All of the things that we took for granted in America, quite frankly, for a long, long time. But in that place, none of those things happened. Actually, it was quite the reverse. The more money that the state got, the worse the services became. The day that I decided to move, actually, I could probably even figure out the exact date on that because it was during the Summer of Love. And you know that when I say the Summer of Love, I'm talking about the summer of BLM, Black Lives Matter, and Antifa rampaging through the streets and destroying all of these businesses and burning down stores and all of these things. And it was actually amazing. Mark mentioned the restaurant that we had lunch at that first time. That was on Ventura Boulevard in the San Fernando Valley. And we were actually, we were right across from the PragerU and Daily Wire offices, which were over there. And by the way, Daily Wire is no longer in California, right? Daily Wire has now moved over to Tennessee and taken something like 100, I think it was about 100 employees that they had in California. So you got to remember, every time one of these companies go, it's not just Ben Shapiro leaving. It's not, and his wife's a doctor, and don't forget it, he likes to tell everybody. It's not just that. It's that you're taking good people. You're taking the people that are the law-abiding citizens, that are positive members of their communities and all of those things. Well, in any event, Mark and I had lunch at this, and his son had lunch at this place on Ventura Boulevard. And then we had the Summer of Love, and BLM and Antifa, they're burning down all the stores. And it was rather extraordinary because all of the stores kept putting up BLM signs and love is love and all of the, these nonsensical, we believe in science, just ask them how many genders there are, all of these ridiculous signs all over the things, all over the storefronts as they were boarding the storefronts up. And I thought, man, irony is truly dead. I mean, the idea that you'd have to board up your store because the protesters who are supposedly the good guys are coming by is, this is 1984 level stuff. Anyway, the Summer of Love happens. I lived about a block or two off of Ventura Boulevard, and one day the riots were going right by my house, quite literally right by my house. And, people somehow figured out where I lived, and I had people screaming at me and throwing stuff and all this stuff. And that really was the beginning moment where I realized I have to get out of here because what I realized was the services of the city were not functioning anymore. That people could approach you at your house, that if something, God forbid, happened at my house, that calling the police was going to do nothing. These were the same people who were calling to defund the police, and in Los Angeles, they were doing just that. So I say all of this to say that the red pilling of America right now is happening whether you can fully see it or not. And sometimes I think actually one of the reasons that the mainstream media seems so hysterical about absolutely everything is because they know it's happening. That in essence, we can talk about left and right, and we can talk about Republican and Democrat or liberal and conservative. But basically there's a set of people who roughly believe in reality and roughly believe, I would say, in the ideas that America was founded upon. Individual rights, rule of law, equality, not equity. And then there's a set of people who believe in something very different. They believe in collectivism. They believe that your immutable characteristics are more important than the sum totality of who you are. They believe that somehow, if the state is just given enough power, that the state will be able to control you in a way that is somehow better than you can control yourself. I simply don't believe that. I don't believe that imperfect creatures, which is what we all are as human beings, that imperfect creatures can create a perfect system. And of course, that's fairly obvious. If you have an imperfect designer, then the product is going to be imperfect. And in many ways, that's why the left hates the individual more than anything else. It's why they absolutely hate Black conservatives, or say gay conservatives, or female conservatives. They love women, but they don't love Candace Owens. They don't love Sarah Huckabee Sanders, right? They don't they love black people, but they don't love Thomas Sowell, they don't love Larry Elder. The list of this goes on and on. These are actually the people they hate the most because the individual is the problem in their perfect machine. And all of us are individuals. You know, even right now, I'm talking to you guys at Convention Estates. There's hundreds of people in that room. I would venture to say that, you know, roughly speaking, you guys have if I polled everyone in the room, your ideas are pretty similar, but absolutely not all similar. You may have different ideas on abortion or on taxes or whatever it might be. And that is the beauty of the American system. Now to link this all, of course, to Convention of States, that idea, the idea that people can go to a different state and live a different way, that's how it was set up. That is what federalism is all about. And I don't think most people realize that. That may sound somewhat crazy for some of you that have been involved in Convention of States for years, or for those of you that are history buffs or know a lot about the founding of this country. But I think most young people are just waking up to the idea that the states are supposed to be very different. Think how beautiful it is. I lived in a place that was not in line with my views, that when I got there, I'm originally from New York. I moved to California in 2013. By 2021, California had gone off the deep end of leftism, the taxes, all of the stuff. We all know all of the stuff. We don't have to go through it every time. But I had a chance. I had a chance to pick up my life, the resources, all of the goodness that I bring to my community, the economic value that I have as someone with several businesses. And I was able to say to the people around me, hey, you want to get out of here? You want to try it somewhere else and see where those greener pastures are? And we were able to do it. Now think how rare and precious that is. Most countries don't have this. Even most Western countries don't have this, right? In Canada, they don't have this. Sure, you can move from Alberta, you could move east to Toronto, and there is some difference in terms of culture and some of the norms, but it certainly is not like moving from California, Mark, I'll write the check later, to Florida, right? So I moved, in essence, you know, when I got here, and it was funny, when I first got here, it was really wild because everywhere I went, I was mobbed by people. I remember the first time I went to Whole Foods, I walked in and I'm shopping and people are coming up to me. I had a woman try to buy my groceries. Like people were appreciative that someone was saying, hey, Florida man, who has been the butt of a lot of jokes and a lot of memes, you know, this guy with a cigar in his mouth and he's wrestling an alligator while pulling a dog out of its mouth on a golf course in the water. Florida man knew something about freedom that most of us forgot. And the fact that living in Florida is so profoundly different than living in California or living in New York is really, really wonderful. It is what the system was set up to do. You know, my friend Dennis Prager has said it many times. I try to quote people roughly properly when they say something on my show, but he always talks about the experiment of America, that what we are doing in America today is an ongoing experiment. Could you take people from every walk of life, from every religion and ethnicity and every corner of the earth, and could you give them the promise of freedom, the promise that we will treat you as you? If you come here and you will do that, and by the way, you can bring your traditions and you can bring your foods and your music and your clothes and all of those things. You can bring your languages. But can you fold into the richer tapestry of America? That's what the melting pot is all about. And we have done it for 200 plus years extraordinarily well. Not perfectly. And this is one of the things that the left is constantly harping on. Oh, we were not perfect. Well, no nation and no person is perfect. But we are pretty damn good, and we are always striving to find those places of imperfection, right? Women could not vote. Black people were slaves and could not vote. We corrected these things. We are always looking to find those places where equality is found. We've unfortunately, because of what the left and the Democrats have done, we've shifted equality to equity, which is deeply, deeply dangerous. The idea of equality, of course, is that we are all treated equally under the law. If you're a law-abiding citizen and you're here legally, then you have the same exact rights as anyone else. There's nothing called white people rights or straight rights or anything else. That if you are here and you are legal, you are treated equally under the law. And again, we've always tried to expand that definition as much as possible to include more people when we had historical injustices, let's say. What the left now wants to do is create a situation of equity. And this is the most, we can talk about wokeness, we can talk about red pill versus blue pill, we can talk about all the gender stuff and the race stuff. But this idea of equity is the single most dangerous idea happening in America today. The idea, not that the playing field should be even and then it's up to you to figure out, hey, some people are born rich, some people are born with very few physical skills, some people are born poor, have a lot of physical skills, some people are born to abusive or alcoholic parents, some people are born in a great family. We want to do everything we can to get that position to a great family and a healthy community and all of those things. But the gestalt of life is that there's going to be all sorts of people born into all sorts of things. All we can do is say, hey, you're here and you should be treated equally like everybody else. We cannot fix every historical injustice or every perceived injustice. The left has taken that promise of equality in America and they've transformed it into this idea of equity, that we should all end up in the same spot. And if you think I'm being sarcastic or over the top with this is quite literally what Kamala Harris, the vice president, who, as I always remind everybody, was polling at 0 in her own party when Joe Biden or whoever is in charge of Joe Biden plucked her to be VP, last week in the aftermath of Hurricane Ian, she said, these are her words, she said that the recovery would be based on equity and that they would be looking at communities of color, quote, communities of color. This is counter to everything that is American. And it's counter to everything that we were founded upon and that the Declaration of Independence and of course the Constitution and the Bill of Rights are based on. You're not gonna believe this, guys, but human disasters, Mother Nature disasters, they don't care whether you're black or white or Asian or Chinese. A hurricane does not look at two communities and go, okay, let's hit that black community and not this white community. Now, there may be places where certain people of certain ethnicities and skin color move, but if the government starts saying, hey, you will get this because of your skin color, well, they're also at the same time saying to another group of people, you will not get that. And then think about the resentment that will be baked into the system. It will be calcified over time. And that's what the left is really trying to push on America right now. And even that, to get us to the title of this talk, is another red pill moment. I saw it online last week with clips that were going crazy viral, where people who, again, they're sort of mugged liberals, they're sort of default Democrats. And then they see this, and they see Kamala Harris, the vice president of the United States, saying, we're gonna distribute aid after a hurricane based on equity, that we should all end up in the same spot. Also, by the way, the idea that we would all end up in the same spot, that seems to be, that is her purported, by her own words, that is her end goal, that we should all end up in the same spot. That's communism, guys. That's what it is, that at the end of the day, as I had a viewer write into me a few days ago who grew up in communist Poland, that basically the doctors and the janitors and the electricians and the school teachers, they all lived in the same building. They all had the same stuff with the linoleum floors and the fluorescent lighting. And it did not matter what their value was to society. That's not to denigrate a blue collar worker or to put anyone, no one is better than anyone by the title of their position. But the idea that you will just sort of get the same thing that everyone gets regardless, whether the state gives it to you or if someone on the rise is just going too fast, they're gonna push you down. And she wants, and I can only imagine because the federal government, certainly Joe Biden has said it many times, they are now interested in equity. This is not an American concept. And the concept of equity, unfortunately, is going to be seen more and more and more in blue states. We know this, of course, I'm sure many of you have seen the stories over the last 2 or 3 years, that Harvard, which was once considered, our top Ivy League school, right? Everybody, you'd want to go to Harvard if you were going anywhere, it was Harvard. Harvard now openly discriminates against Asian people because they had too many Asian students, meaning that too many Asians in their racist worldview, and I would call this racism, they were looking at who's coming to this school. Boy, we have a lot of Asian people. We're gonna lessen the amount of Asian people. By the way, this isn't even new to Harvard because Harvard used to have quotas when it came to Jewish people. There were too many Jews that were working too hard, studying too hard. This is the same thing that's happening with the Asians now. And they decided to have quotas. Now, I'll try to give the devil his due. As many of you know, I toured with Jordan Peterson for a couple of years, and that's one of his key phrases, that you really want to think about your opponent's argument. You want to steel man the argument. So their argument is, they're looking at this and they're going, well, if we have all these Asians, that means we don't have enough black people, and the system has been racist to black people or brown people, something like that, and we better just get more of them. Now, I think that perhaps at some very thin veneer level, that might make sense. But once you pull back that very thin veneer, what you will find, of course, is that solving perceived racism with present day racism, of course, is racist. So the idea that you would punish, say, a second or third generation Chinese kid or Korean kid whose parents maybe owned a convenience store and most likely came with nothing. I mean, everyone in this room, everyone watching this virtually the story of every American is that their grandparents or great-grandparents, or maybe a little bit further, or maybe they're a first-generation immigrant, they came here with nothing. It's very few people whose ancestors came here with everything. I certainly know it's true for my family when my great-grandparents came here from Eastern Europe and had nothing, and my grandfather grew up in a one-bedroom apartment with 6 brothers and sisters and all of those things just for the promise of freedom, because the promise of freedom was better than the all-encompassing governments, the socialist governments and communist governments that so many people were fleeing. That's the American story, and it doesn't matter if you came from Venezuela or Cuba or Poland or Lithuania. It just simply doesn't matter. Or if you came from an Asian country in this case. So the idea that you would look at the enrolled students in a school and say, well, we want to help black people, so now we're going to punish this kid, this Asian kid who worked hard, played by the rules, did everything right, got the test scores you want to get, and now we're going to punish him. Well, how do you think he's going to start thinking about race after that? How do you think he's going to start thinking about equity after that? But I like to give a silver lining, and on all of my shows, when I talk about a lot of serious news, I try to give a silver lining to all of these things. And the silver lining is that red pilling, that a lot of young kids who would not have thought of these issues, who would not have thought about whether their skin color matters when they're going to school, suddenly they're thinking about it. Suddenly they're going, wait a minute, that government that I didn't think was too bad, why is it forcing me to get the COVID vaccine when I'm, say, 18 and otherwise healthy and I eat right and I take care of myself, and the efficacy of the vaccines is not what's being promised and all of those things. So that's what the red pilling is all about, that there is a way to, I think, clearly state what you believe, fight for American values, and then put those values into action. And I did just that. I mean, my life story, and I think one of the reasons that people care about what I do or buy my books or pay attention to my show is because I was very open about that journey. I was a lefty, and I was saying, guys, something's not right here, and it can't be that all of our ideological opponents are racists and bigots and whatever it might be. And I started challenging the left to be more truly liberal. And it seems like there basically are no liberals anymore. There's Bill Maher and probably your aunt if you're watching this, right? Like everyone has one in the family. They have one in the family. You treat them okay, and they seem like they're nice people. They're just confused about the issues because the red pilling is taking that aunt that we all have or that uncle that we all have, that sort of bleeding heart liberal, and explaining to them, boy, do you know that big government programs don't really work, and that when you create a giant welfare state, that you actually trap poor people into intergenerational poverty. I go into this quite extensively in my last book, that this is what happens. Thomas Sowell has been writing about this for quite literally decades, for about 5 decades. He's, I think, 93 right now, and he's still writing about it. That the government creates these big programs. The liberals go, oh, we want to help poor people. What can we do to help poor people? Let's give them money. Let's give them services. Let's give them housing. And then what happens? And this has nothing to do with skin color. Let's be very clear about that. The people who are the recipients of these things, they start doing less for themselves. And again, that has nothing to do with skin color. What that is a very human reaction. Oh, you're given housing. You're given a certain amount of a stipend to eat or go out or do what you want. you might be less inclined to work. You might be less inclined to get out of that poverty. And even more perverse, even more perverse is that what happens is it causes it intergenerationally. So if there's, the example that I use in the book is that my sister, who was married, had 2 kids. She actually just had her 3rd this week as well. We're raising a lot of Floridians. She fled New York, now moved down here to Florida. So we're raising a lot of sane Floridians down here right now. She lived in New York City, Upper West Side, very nice area. She lived in a 1-bedroom apartment that they built a wall and converted it to a 2-bedroom. They had their 2 kids, my sister and her husband, and she was paying market value for her apartment, which at the time was about $5,000 or $6,000. In essence, for as small as she always called it, my shoebox. She had a tiny apartment, which once you built a wall, you didn't even have a window in the main room. So you almost felt like you were in a jail cell while you were in the living room. But she paid market value. Now, interestingly, her building was half rent subsidized. It was half basically the government would come in and say to a certain set of people, often based on skin color, hey, you guys will get the exact same apartment that these people are paying $5-6 grand for. You'll get it for $300 a month. And you can stay in it as long as you want, by the way. And you can, in essence, gift it to the generation behind you. So there would be families, we'd be in the elevator, and there would be families in there that would have 3 generations of people paying, say, $300 a month for the exact same apartment that my sister was paying $5,000. And that's why equity, that's why these services are so dangerous. They are intended well, but I believe somebody said that the road to hell is paved with good intentions. And they have created a situation where the good people who work hard, who take some of that responsibility on themselves, they are actually punished by the system for doing it that way. And then again, it has nothing to do with skin color. Then a certain set of people are given stuff which actually hampers them from actually ever living out that American dream, while at the same time, the people who are giving them all of the stuff, they're giving them all of the stuff and telling them how racist and systemically awful and what a white patriarchy the system is. It has created an absolutely toxic situation. And I would argue a situation that cannot hold much longer. So what is the answer to that? And then I know you guys have some questions, so we can move over to the Q&A. What is the answer to that? Well, the answer to that, I would say it's twofold. The answer first, at an individual level, is really just understanding some of this stuff. Understanding it and being able to communicate it in a good, decent way. And if you can do that, if you can do a little bit, something approximate to maybe what I've done here, to your friends that are on the fence about this stuff, you can bring people over. You really can. It is not easy, and they will be angry at you, and they will call you bigots and racists, and they will unfriend you on Facebook and all of those things. But if you stay at it, and I don't mean be a punching bag. Sometimes there are cases that you just have to let go. I think everyone in this room has been through this. I've been through it with friends and family. Sometimes you just can't get them at that moment. And my personal opinion is you have to let them go. You are not on this earth to be endlessly abused by someone. But if you see someone that has a glimmer in their eye, they're trying to figure it out, be patient with them. Give them a chance to kind of come over here. And one of the things that I've been shocked by, actually, in my political evolution, let's say, is that once I started talking to the people that I thought were the bad guys, the Larry Elders and the Ben Shapiros and the Dennis Pragers and the Glenn Becks and the rest of them, what I realized was, even though I had some political disagreements with them, which over the years, those political disagreements maybe have gone from this to this, they were willing to have the conversation. They were willing to put it aside at the end and have a drink and break bread. And I found people to be generous of spirit and kind and good. And there's very little of that on the other side. So you have to basically work with these people on their way to get out. And if you get them out, man, they'll be the most red-pilled people on the planet, because that's why I'm so red-pilled. That's why I fight for this the way that I do. It's why, as I stated when I started, that I am the proudest new Floridian. And I truly believe this. It is in me now. It is my life's mission to make sure that this state stays free Fortunately, we have a governor here in Ron DeSantis, who I think in many ways you could argue is the de facto president of the United States, and in some ways almost the leader. Yeah, you can make some noise for Ron DeSantis. He is. And let me just tell you something about Ron DeSantis. You know, since I got down here, I've been fortunate enough to be invited to a few events where I've opened for the governor. He joined me on my book tour where I interviewed him. I've had dinner with him and his wife a few times. Putting aside politics for a second, because we can all get lost in politics. This is a good man. This is a really good man. And it ain't going to get better than him. And look at the way he has led this state just in the last week related to Hurricane Ian. Florida rebuilt the bridge to Pine Island in 3 days. If the federal government had to do this, it would take 3 years and cost 100 times more. But that's what we did here in Florida. And yeah, and that's what we will absolutely continue to do. Because once you decide, hey, this is how I want to live. I want to fund the police rather than defund the police. I want low taxes because the government just doesn't need that much. But I believe in rule of law, and I believe, let's say, I believe in school choice, as much school choice as possible. Maybe you believe in some level of public education. Whatever those differences are, here in Florida, we're having those debates and those arguments in a really profoundly honest way, and it's working. It's really working. So it is the beacon, I would say, of freedom in the world, which is why I say Ron DeSantis, sure, on his desk, it doesn't say President of the United States yet. Yet is the operative word. Because I think it will one day. And as some of you may have seen, there was a really wonderful image that went viral a couple days ago of President Biden came down to Florida and they brought the podium out there with the emblem, President of the United States. And then DeSantis took the stage with that thing right there. And man, did it look just perfect. I mean, Biden's regretting that one, although I'm sure he had no clue what was going on. Anyway, all of this to say, and then we can get to the Q&A, that the experiment right now, the experiment of convention of states, and that the states can make decisions on their own, and then at the same time, the states can figure out which states they want to work with to rein in the power of the federal government and make this thing work the way it was supposed to. It's possible, man, and it's happening right now. And that is the greatest red pill you can hand somebody, because so many people think, oh, it's never been worse, and our political strife has never been worse, and we've never hated each other as much, and all of these things. But you know what? If you close Twitter for a few minutes, if you get out into the real world, if you move to a place that is in line with your values, you will find that the opportunity is absolutely endless. And my life is a living example of that, and that's why I'm thrilled to talk to you guys. And I promise you, especially if you're doing the Convention of States next year in the free state of Florida, that I absolutely will be there. And now I'm happy to take questions. And Mark, nothing is off limits, so fire away. And you know what? I'm going to throw an extra 5 in here just for the hell of it. There you go.
Thank you, Dave. You're awesome, man.
What do you got for me, Mark?
All right. So, one of the things I like to do is help people get personal with friends at Convention of States, because they see your show, they know you on stage or on other people's shows, and I've had a chance to hang out with you and David and know you personally. And so there's a personal memory I have of me and Patty and you and David together that is just a life highlight and so hilarious. So I want your recollection of this. There was a night in Palm Beach, and we went out to a restaurant, had a fabulous dinner. In fact, I think at that dinner you were telling me about that you wanted to be a dad and how excited you were to be a dad. So by the way, I'm so excited for you guys and the new babies. That's such a cool deal.
Thank you.
Man.
I'll let you know in a couple of years.
Yeah. Call me when they're about 12 or 13. I might have some advice. But we had this night in Palm Beach. We went out to dinner at a seafood restaurant, the Breakers, had a fantastic dinner, had some cocktails, and we weren't staying there. It was time to take an Uber back to our hotel. We called an Uber, and we got in the Uber, and I don't know if you remember this. This was the Uber ride of a lifetime. Do you remember that Uber?
I believe we were very drunkenly karaokeing to "Oh What a Night."
It was
in West Palm Beach.
I wasn't going to bring up the drunken part, but
I can't confirm you were drunk. I'll just, in full disclosure, I was drunk. I'm not sure about you. You're a little more respectable than I am.
Yeah, it was not only was there plenty of alcohol imbibed before we got in the Uber, but we just called a regular Uber and we get in and the guy literally has full karaoke going on with a microphone and a disco ball and there's lights flashing inside the Uber. It was a disco nights with the four of us. Pretty crazy evening. So to me, still in my lifetime, best Uber ride ever.
That doesn't take much these days because Uber ain't what it used to be, unfortunately, now that nobody wants to work. But that's a whole other topic.
Well, luckily that was pre-mask. So I have heard Dave sing karaoke, I'm just saying. Okay, more serious question. You talked about the video, Why I Left the Left. Could you just describe sort of briefly, there's really kind of a moment in time when you said, wait, what is going on here? This doesn't make sense to me. Can you describe that moment for everybody?
Sure. I'll actually tell you a funny story that I've only told once or twice publicly that happened right after that moment, which was when PragerU does these animated videos that I'm sure you've all seen, these 5-minute shorts, the animation takes a bit of time. So you as the presenter, you write the script and then you go to the office and you massage the text a little bit. You have final say. So one of the greatest things that I can say about PragerU, and I can say an awful lot of great things about them, is that they give you the last word. They will not force you to say anything you want, anything that you don't want to say. They really leave it up to you as the creator. But in any event, you finalize that text, you shoot the video, and then the animation takes about 2 or 3 months. So it was 2 or 3 months after we had shot the thing, and I didn't know when it was coming out. And I woke up one morning, and I don't do this anymore, but I used to have my phone by my nightstand, like almost everyone does. I try not to keep my phone in the bedroom anymore. And I woke up and I had the notifications on my phone, and I saw PragerU. It was Why I Left the Left by Dave Rubin. And I actually freaked out because if you watch the video again, at no point in the video had I ever said I left the left. At that point, I really was still trying my best to say, hey, we liberals have a problem here. We need to act more liberally in the classical liberal tradition. We have to stop doing these things. So the title of the video came out, and I thought, man, they might have screwed up my entire career because this was the position that I was trying to hold. And I really was not upset, and I really was upset, and I was about to get on the phone with them. And then I started looking at the comments in the video, and all of these people kept saying, boy, Dave is reminding us that there were good liberals one day, and we might have political disagreements with them, again, when it comes to, say, tax rates or whatever it might be. But there were the JFK type liberal, the Daniel Patrick Moynihan type liberal. These people did exist, and unfortunately, they don't exist anymore. In any event, flash forward over the next few days and then weeks and months, the video went so viral that the fact that this Why I Left the Left moniker became attached to me, I think ultimately became good because then it gave room, in essence, for other people to do the same thing. But to directly answer your question about sort of the moments, there were a few of them. The most important moment and the seminal moment really for me was an interview that I did with Larry Elder, who of course, conservative radio host, who happens to be black. That's the way I would describe Larry, who's one of my best friends on planet Earth. Larry and I sat down. We had never met before. We started talking about policing and systemic racism, and he basically beat me over the head with facts. And the interview was not live streamed. It was to tape, and we were going to air it the next day. And the interview ends, and I was beaten by facts. I mean, he went through policing and shooting and skin color and all of these things. And it was interesting because, I mentioned that factory settings phrase before. All of the arguments that I was coming to him with were factory setting arguments. Well, the police must shoot more black people, and there must be some level of racism in the system and all of these things. And he just basically knocked them down one at a time, very calmly and in a really solid tone that he was not attacking me on. I go into the control room after the interview, and I had a few producers at the time, and everybody was saying the same thing. Dave, we're going to edit that. Don't worry about it. We're not going to put that up. And sometimes in life you have a moment, and you don't even know how the moment happens or even what you're doing in that moment. But I really believe that my best and worst career moment were at the exact same time. It was my worst moment on camera because I didn't know what I was arguing, and it was exposed. So that one's very obvious. It became my best moment because when the producer said to me, hey, we're not going to air that, I instinctively said, no, we have to air that. If I am an interviewer, if anything I do has any value, and then there's a real moment, and just because I don't look so great, I take it out, then there's no point in me doing all this. And then, of course, that video got clipped, many, many times over. It's been seen probably 50 million times. Yeah, thank you. And I'm very proud of that. I will say, though, when those videos get clipped and it says something like "Black conservative destroys white libtard," it's usually not that fun when you are that white libtard, but here we are.
Dave, I got to tell you, because having watched that video early on, and followed you and got to know you in the beginning before you would have called yourself a conservative, that video, even for me as a conservative, it was such a moment. I think because of what you're saying, it was so honest. And in my view of it, as I'm watching it, I can sense your confusion. You're like, okay, like he's saying honest, true stuff, and you're struggling with it, and the honesty of watching you struggle with that, and then your public willingness to sort of go through this, I hate to use this word, but you go through this transition.
Not that kind of transition.
But to watch you do that publicly, I think has been a profound public service. And because it's not easy. I'm not going to name names, but somebody came up to me in the room this morning after watching somebody here who is not part of our group, but is hotel staff, and came up to me and said, I've been at this conference, I've been listening for a couple of days. I went home last night, I talked to my wife. I don't think I'm a Democrat, I think I'm a Republican.
And she said, sleep in the living room.
But we applaud for that, but also that's hard, right?
Yeah.
That's not like you do that and you go, yeah, I'm in, it's awesome. There's confusion and it's difficult, and then you have a whole bunch of people that you know and love who now see you as, well, you're not what I thought you were, and maybe you've betrayed who you are. Can you talk about that on a personal level? Because you had to deal with a bunch of that.
Yeah, it's interesting because in that moment when Larry's he's just beating me senseless with facts. And as I said, he's doing it in a respectful way.
Yeah.
He really is. He wasn't yelling at me. He wasn't, you're an idiot and here's what's reality and blah, blah, blah. And I'm just kind of taking it. And I guess that's a little bit of, we all have a certain temperature that we run on. Everyone has this. Some people run really hot. Some people run really cool. I'm pretty cool in terms of I don't get outraged that easily. But if you think about that moment, if that moment had happened with, say, a host on MSNBC or a host on CNN, what would they have done? They would have immediately, well, first off, they probably would have cut Larry's mic and they would have went to commercial, or they would have somehow said that he was actually the racist, or the next day, Huffington Post would have said self-hating black man, Larry Elder. I mean, look no further than when Larry Elder ran for governor here in California. The Los Angeles Times ran one of the most vile headlines I have ever seen, saying that Larry Elder was the black face of white supremacy. Right. I toured with Larry Elder what a beautiful ending to this story, right? So you have that interview, I believe, was in, I believe that was the fall or spring, it was the spring of 2016. Flash forward 5 years later, now Larry and I are campaigning together for that guy to recall Gavin Newsom and be the governor of California. I mean, what a beautiful story that is, right? On top of a friendship. It's so beautiful. But when I was touring with him and opening for him on these stops, nobody cared whether his audience was white or black or Chinese or straight or gay or anything else. It was a whole bunch of people with a lot of American flags talking about freedom, talking about their ability to get out there and go and live their lives as they see fit. So what a beautiful moment there. But in terms of the personal part that you mentioned, it is tough, man. It is tough. There is simply no way around it. I have lost friends over this. I have family members that don't talk to me anymore. And this is one of the dangers that the left also has pushed onto society. If you believe that your political ideology is your all-encompassing ideology, it will drive you to do crazy things. That's why so much of the woke left has become cult-like. You better agree with everything they say, and not only everything they say, you better believe it the second they believe it. So if they turn on an issue, you gotta believe it right then and there, right? If they say girls are boys and boys are girls, you gotta be in that with them the moment they do it, or you're a transphobe. We have seen this consistently happen over the last couple of years. So it is really, really tough. But my answer to this, because I get this sort of question all the time, my answer is always the same. I think, and I'm pretty sure everyone would agree with me on this, I would much rather live and be hated for the things that I believe than be loved and be on my knees for the rest of my life. And that's how they want you. They want you as a slave in their system. I refuse to do it. And by the way, you know what is also going to happen? You're going to find other friends on the other side, and you will find more rich relationships and everything else. Because if you right now, and I'm sure people in the audience are doing this, if you're hanging out with a whole bunch of people who don't really know what you think, or you wouldn't want your picture taken because you were at a Convention of States event or a Turning Point event or a Students for Liberty event, if you're doing that to yourself already, what else will you shave off of over time? What else will you not say? What else will you acquiesce on? So at some point you just say the buck stops here, this is who I am, and I have consistently found that it will work out better for you that way.
Hey, Dave, I hate to cut you off, but I'm getting a text from David. Apparently there are diapers to change or something, so you got to go. We love you, my friend. We appreciate you stopping in with us. Dave Rubin, everybody.
Thank you, guys. Really appreciate it. And if there are diapers to change, I really wish I could stay. Can we extend this for maybe a half hour? Thank you, guys.